I just wanted to make this quick video to help Mohammed Rabbani, who has spent his life committed to promoting the welfare of his community and upholding the fundamental principles of due process and the rule of law. He worked within his community, mediating between gangs to end cycles of violence and reach peaceful solutions to the issues they were raising. He has consistently maintained and promoted the use of dialogue as a means of bringing conflicts to an end. As International Director, he has been instrumental in bringing to light abuses of torture, human rights violations, seeking justice and accountability for victims of such abuses. So he essentially is campaigns on behalf of human rights, law and free speech, okay? So last year Rabbani flew into London after going on a trip overseas to investigate allegations of US torture. He was arrested on his return to Britain after refusing to hand over the password to his laptop. For that act, Rabbani was just found guilty of a terrorism offence. Under Schedule 7 of the British Terrorism Act, you can be detained for up to 6 hours, you have no right to remain silent, you have no right to a lawyer, and refusing to answer any question or provide passwords to electronic devices is itself an offence. Mohammed Rabbani spoke out after the verdict. Today's judgment, based on the judge's and prosecution's acceptance that I am of good character and worthy of belief, highlights the absurdity of Schedule 7 law. They accept that at no point was I under suspicion, and that, ultimately, this was a matter of having been profiled at the port. There are important implications for our collective privacy, as Schedule 7 acts as a digital strip search. I took the decision not to raise the details of an important torture case before my arrest. Ultimately, I have been convicted of protecting the confidentiality of my client. If privacy and confidentiality are crimes, then the law stands condemned. KAGE and I are glad we brought this case, and the result indicates that our only option is to change the law. Well, I would like to explain to Mohammed Rabbani that actually there's no need for you to change the law, because the law is absolutely on your side, okay? And I'm going to share a couple of points, legal points here, and I really think that you need to appeal, Mr. Rabbani, and you need to refer to these two legal points which I'm going to share with you now. I could have got all scholarly books up and things like that, but actually, which I have read some of those articles, but I'm just going to refer to a couple of Wikipedia points here because they do just clarify the main points of actually what the books are saying and other law papers that I've read. So first of all, we're going to have a look at the legislative intent, okay? So the basic thing with legislative intent, which I've done a little thing here, so let's look at human rights. So legislative intent should basically, it's to do with the interpretation of the law, isn't it? Law and legislation. So let's take human rights for example. They constitute the principles on which public policy, law and legislation is founded. Legislative intent within Article 10 can never be undermined to serve purposes that are obnoxious to its basic principle of protecting and defending, i.e. freedom of expression on behalf of public rights, law, health and safety. Because, you know, that is the whole point why we have human rights in the first place, isn't it? For all of these things. And so anything that, any interpretation or limitations applied onto something like Article 10, which defends our freedom, our rights to freedom of expression, any limitations that are imposed on that cannot be applied if they are actually serving obnoxious purposes to the basic principles of Article 10. So in his case, you know, the Human Rights Act, he's referring to his rights to privacy. Okay? his rights to privacy and freedom of movement without fear of arrest, because he's a law-abiding citizen. He's not doing anything wrong. He's not supporting terrorists. He's supporting people who had their human rights abused and denied. And so legislative intent is very important, because we're talking about the golden rule in English law. Now, the golden rule applies, you can have it in its narrow approach, which is where it examines the ambiguity or the absurdity of the wording of a law, which sometimes the wording can be used to make nonsense of the law just by interpreting the words. But then there's also the wider approach, you see. Because, you know, like for example in this case, it says the court decided that such an interpretation would lead to an absurd result and interpreted in the vicinity of to cover a person already on the premises. Because the golden rule of law is that the literal interpretation, or, you know, an interpretation that would lead to a manifest absurdity, or to a result that is obnoxious to principles of public policy. So you understand how the golden rule applies here to the principles of public policy. Well, in a way, the Terrorism Act, Schedule 7, is also public policy, isn't it? Okay? And the whole idea of public policy is to prevent terrorism. And what is it that terrorists do? What's the biggest risk of a terrorist? Is that they ignore people's human rights, don't they? They're happy. A terrorist is happy to kill innocent people just going about their daily business. It's prepared to sacrifice them for their cause, for the sake of their cause. So they are criminals, aren't they? They're criminals. But they've got some cause that they support, and they're happy to kill people in order to highlight their cause, to spill blood, to cause terror, to cause injury, confusion, chaos. So that's why we have terrorist laws, isn't it? So the golden rule behind the terrorist law is to protect the public from terrorists. So what we have in Mohammed Rabbani's case here is an ignorance of the golden rule. What we're witnessing is a perversion of the law. We're witnessing a perversion of Schedule 7 law, because they have used it to arrest an innocent man who is actually standing up for human rights, who is actually behaving in a manner which is the very opposite of assisting in terrorism. He's going about his lawful duties, and who has honourably refused to hand over a password when he's not been accused of committing any crime or suspected of committing any crime. He's refused to hand over his password in the interest of protecting his client's confidential information, and yet he has been accused and found guilty of terrorism. Apparently, he's a terrorist now. So that is an absurd result, isn't it? That is an absurd result, and that is a breaking of the golden rule. Now, that's serious. The whole of Britain needs to wake up to this, because I tell you now, once the golden rule of law is broken, we have no law. There is no law. You're talking about absolute tyranny. And that is tyranny when somebody who's committed no crime, who simply is working on behalf of human rights and actually doing everything in his power to resolve the kind of problems that lead to terrorist acts, who is actively working towards finding solutions to the kind of problems that create terrorists in the first place, and also assisting innocent people who've been accused of terrorism and suffered human rights abuses, wrongfully accused, and suffered human rights abuses as a direct result. So, you know, we are talking about limiting human rights unlawfully, okay, because through perverting legislative intent and breaking the golden rule. Breaking the golden rule. And his case is a perfect example of it. And you need to bring this into the courts, Mohammed Rabbani, and you need to appeal against this, and you need to refer to the golden rule of law, and that it can never, ever be applied ever again, that people like yourself are going to end up being accused of terrorism simply because you're trying to help people who've been wrongly accused of terrorism and suffered human rights abuses. So now it is time for the whole of the British public to wake up. To wake up to reality. Because I tell you, this has implications on everybody in Britain, because this is a precedent. This is a legal precedent that's been set in our courts. And that means all of us are at risk now. Everybody is at risk. What, so the police suddenly stop you, you're not accused of any crime, but you suspected that you might be involved in terrorism, they've got no evidence, but at the end of the day you refuse to give your password over to them. You don't want them to go through all your computer and getting access to personal information of your friends and family and even clients. You say no, oh, suddenly you're guilty of terrorism. No, that is a breaking of the golden rule of law. And that is a very, very serious situation. So please, Mr. Rabbani, please appeal and ask your barristers to look at this now, because, you know, this needs to end, and the golden rule can never ever be broken. Whoever attempts to break it, then they need to be challenged. They need to be legally challenged. We always have a lawful duty to defend the golden rule of law, and you know, that is directly related to the manner in which it is interpreted and applied. That it must never be abused or perverted for obnoxious or absurd purposes. And actually, we've witnessed it here. This is exactly what happens when the golden rule of law has been broken. What has happened to Mohammed Rabbani, God bless him, this is what has happened to him. So I send you my love and strength, Mohammed Rabbani, and my sincere thanks for the work that you've been doing on behalf of humanity. And I send you my love and wish you and your family all the best. And, you know, I hope this helps. And I hope that you will stand up, and you know, that you will successfully appeal against this terrible travesty of justice that has happened to you. And basically you've been forced to suffer exactly what you have worked so hard to defend and protect other people from. And I'm absolutely devastated to witness it. Unfortunately, you know, I am to some degrees, and a lot of people like myself in Britain, we're a victim of exactly the same kind of attack ourselves, this perversion of the course of justice and a breaking of the golden rule of law. And you know, that's one of the reasons why I'm aware of this. And you know, this is why I'm explaining. Please challenge this and let us restore the golden rule of law. So thank you for taking time to listen, and love and strength to everybody.